Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into a rivalry that's taken decades to simmer, not days. No matter what the headlines scream, you're floating above deserts that smell of sunburned stone and old diesel. The mountains of Iran ripple beneath you like the folds of an ancient, sun-creased rug. Farther west, the Mediterranean twinkles near the sliver of land that will one day become Israel, but not yet, not tonight. Not at this hour in history. You re in a time when borders were drawn by people in suits sipping tea in London and Paris. A time when oil hadn't yet soaked into everything, but it was starting to. You probably won't survive this. Honestly, not the espionage, not the coups, and definitely not the endless conferences where people in bad ties make decisions that haunt whole regions for a century. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You drift over 1900s Persia, not Iran yet still known by its ancient name, and still tangled in the polite but suffocating embrace of empires. Russia leans in from the north, and Britain looms large from the south. The Persian Gulf glistens like a tempting jewel, and beneath it, Britain suspects there's oil. Spoiler, there is. Lots of it. This is the era of secret telegrams and bearded clerks shuffling paper in back rooms that smell of old ink and new lies. The Anglo-Persian Oil Company sets up shop in 1908. The deal? British investors get rich. Iran gets well peanuts and a growing sense of resentment. Meanwhile, the place that will one day become Israel. It's still a dream scribbled in journals and whispered in. The Zionist movement is gaining traction in Europe and Ottoman Palestine, but it's nowhere near sovereign state status. For now, Jews in the Middle East are scattered, some in Baghdad, some in Cairo, a few in Tehran. They're generally left alone. You're floating above two very separate worlds. Iran is a proud ancient empire struggling to modernize, bullied by powers it can't shake off. The Jewish communities in the Middle East, minorities trying to survive in a crumbling Ottoman order. But here's the thing, neither Iran nor these Jewish communities have beef with each other. They barely register on each other's radar. You might hover near Tehran's Grand Bazaar, the air rich with saffron and sweat as merchants haggle beneath stained glass windows. In a quiet corner of the city, a small Jewish community lives without much fuss. There's no sense of future hostility. No simmering tension. If you'd told someone in 1910 that Iran and Israel would one day despise each other, they'd probably blink and ask, Israel? What's that? And yet, the seeds are being sown slowly beneath the surface. In Europe, Zionist thinkers like Theodor Herzl are sketching blueprints for a Jewish homeland. In Iran, a soldier named Reza Khan is watching his crumbling country and planning how to drag it into modernity. Then, World War I crashes into the region like a sandstorm. Iran tries to stay neutral. But neutrality in this era is a fantasy. Russian troops enter from the north. British forces occupy from the south. The Ottomans press from the west. It's like watching three cats fight in a sack is on fire. Iran, already fragile, nearly collapses. By war's end, Britain is emboldened. It proposes a plan. Turn Iran into a full-on protectorate. Basically, a polite way of saying, you're ours now. Iranians revolt, not with weapons, but with stubborn nationalism. And this is where the story takes its first turn. Because the chaos creates a power vacuum and into it steps Reza Khan. You trail behind him as he rises. A military officer with a mustache you could use to open a bottle. In 1921, he stages a coup, and by 1925, he becomes Reza Shah Pahlavi, founder of the Pahlavi dynasty and self-declared architect of a modern Iran. You walk beside him as roads are paved, railways built, schools opened, veils are discouraged, neckties encouraged. It's modernization by brute force. Think, Westernization, but with extra police. And what of the Jews in Iran? They benefit, oddly enough. Reza Shah believes in a strong, secular state. He wants national identity to trump religious difference, so Jewish Iranians get more rights than before. They're still second class, but slightly less so. Now pivot to the west over to British Mandate Palestine. The land is divided, messy, restless. Waves of Jewish immigrants are arriving from Europe, especially after pogroms in Russia and Poland. Arab communities feel squeezed. Tensions rise. You feel it in the air, like static before a storm. But even here, Iran and the budding Zionist movement remain distant planets. Iran doesn't support Zionism, but it doesn't oppose it either. It's busy chasing trains, building schools, and trying not to get colonized again. Still, a quirky little fact for you. In the 1930s, Iranian passports helped some European Jews escape the Nazis. Seriously, it's a niche loophole in international bureaucracy, and it saves lives. That little twist, history nerds love it. Meanwhile, Germany whispers to Iran. Hitler's team flatters Reza Shah, calls Iran an Aryan nation, just like Germany. It's weird, right? But flattering. Reza Shah eats it up. He even starts leaning pro-German by the late 30s, hoping it'll keep Britain and Russia at bay. Historians still argue whether Reza Shah was actually sympathetic to Nazi ideology or just playing power games with whoever offered leverage. Either way, it backfires spectacularly. Because once World War II begins, Britain and the Soviet Union decide Iran is too strategically important to ignore. So in 1941, they invade again. Reza Shah is forced to abdicate. His son, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, takes the throne. Young, inexperienced, a bit soft around the edges. You watch the transition like someone half watching a soap opera and half watching a chess game. Nothing seems explosive, but something is shifting. And far west, in the smoldering remains of Europe, the Holocaust decimates Jewish communities. The scale of horror is so immense, it scrapes the breath out of you. 6 million murdered. Whole cultures vaporized. Out of this ash, the push for a Jewish homeland becomes urgent and impossible to ignore. You don't know it yet, but everything's about to accelerate. The British, exhausted by war and revolts in Palestine, announce they're leaving the region. The UN proposes a partition, split Palestine into Jewish and Arab states. Arabs protest, Jews prepare. Iran watches from the sidelines, more concerned about keeping its shaky monarchy upright than about a new state in the Levant. But the clock ticks louder. Israel is nearly born, and Iran's indifference is about to be tested. You pick up where you left off, drifting over a land poised on the edge of transformation. It's 1948. The British are packing up their dusty trunks and fading into the Mediterranean haze. And like a lightning bolt in the dark, the State of Israel is declared. Tel Aviv erupts into cheers. Arab nations declare war almost immediately. And Iran politely furrows its brow and mumbles something about international law. You might expect a fiery sermon or street protests in Tehran, but they never come. The Iranian government votes against Israel's UN membership, sure, but its reaction feels oddly muted, mildly critical, more focused on keeping up appearances in the Arab world than actually picking a fight. Behind the scenes, Iran continues to operate with a kind of cautious curiosity. There are whispers that the Jewish state might be useful somehow. Tehran has its own Jewish population to consider one of the oldest in the world. Actually, and the leadership knows that overt hostility could come back to bite them. Meanwhile, Reza Shah's son, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, knew Shah's trying to hold the country together. He's young, photogenic, a little too dependent on foreign powers, and deeply unsure whether he has a modern monarch or just an anxious middle manager with a palace. You hover in the streets of Tehran. Jazz plays in. Students quote French philosophers. Oil seeps beneath the ground, but the profits float elsewhere to Britain, mostly. And while the Shah clinks glasses with Western diplomats, a quiet resistance is brewing. Nationalism is rising. Anti-colonial sentiment is pulsing through the capital like a low drumbeat. And then you spot a man named Mohammad Mossadegh. He's tall, wiry, and slightly eccentric. Loves the law. Faints when emotional which happens a lot. In 1951, he becomes prime minister and does the unthinkable. Nationalizes Iran's oil. That's right, kicks out the British and takes control of the most valuable resource in the country. The West is not thrilled. You might pause here to appreciate the sheer guts of this move. Oil is the bloodstream of mid-century empire. Touch it, and you touch a nerve buried under decades of greed and entitlement. And touch it, he does. Britain stages an embargo. Iran's economy buckles, but Mossadegh holds firm. And this catches the attention of another distant observer. Now, Israel doesn't have a formal relationship with Iran at this point, but they're watching. And when it becomes clear that Mossadegh leans toward neutrality not pro-West, not pro-East, just fiercely Iranian alarm bells ring across Western capitals. Historians still argue whether Israel directly influenced what happened next. But what we do know is this. In 1953, the CIA and MI6 stage a coup. Mossadegh is ousted. The Shah is reinstated with full powers, and Israel quietly breathes a sigh of relief. Why? Because Mossadegh's nationalism threatened the regional status quo. And Israel, still young and diplomatically isolated, needs regional quiet even if it means supporting a monarch many see as a puppet. The Shah, for his part, begins leaning west with more vigor. He likes the perks: weapons, prestige, big development deals. He dreams of turning Iran into a gleaming modern state, and anyone who disagrees is invited to take a nice, long vacation, ... In prison, you walk beside him through palaces and parade grounds, past sculptures of winged bulls and American advisors in sunglasses. It's the 1950s, and Iran is a state of contradictions. Ancient and modern, rich and poor, nationalist and westernized. And in the middle of all this, a relationship begins to take root. Quietly, carefully, Israel opens a small, unofficial mission in Tehran in the late 50s. It doesn't have a flag or a plaque, but the door is always unlocked for the right guests. Technicians come and go. Intelligence officers chat over sweet tea. Trade deals are brokered in boardrooms with no windows. The Jewish community in Iran, meanwhile, begins to breathe easier. No pogroms, no riots. Under the Shah, they're allowed to rise, to work, to blend. And as Israel begins to welcome Jewish immigrants from across the Middle East, Iranian Jews are gently encouraged to stay where they are. Iran, you see, is special. A place with no real history of organized anti-Semitism. A place with a rich Jewish heritage dating back to Cyrus the Great. It's not paradise, but it's livable. And for Israel, having a stable, semi-friendly, oil-rich neighbor who doesn't want to burn your flag, that's gold. So you find yourself moving between two worlds that are growing closer but can never admit it. Israel sends agricultural experts to help Iran with arid farming. Iran sells Israel oil. The two share intelligence about Arab movements. All hush-hush, of course. And still, the Arab world watches. You float over Cairo, Damascus, Baghdad cities where the name Israel sparks outrage. Publicly, Iran affirms its solidarity with Arab nations. It issues statements, hosts pan-Islamic conferences, nods vigorously at anti-Zionist slogans. But behind closed doors, the friendship deepens. There's even a moment in the early 60s when the Shah tells a French journalist with a smile, "We don't have diplomatic relations with Israel, ... Only working ones." Classic royal ambiguity. Like saying we're not dating, we just text a lot at night. And what of the public? What do average Iranians think? That's trickier. Most don't know about the ties with Israel. The media is state-controlled. Rumors exist, of course, but they're hazy, half-believed. What most people do see is their king dressing like a Kennedy, driving American cars, and promising a future of endless prosperity. And so, for a time, Iran's relationship with Israel becomes one of the Middle East's best-known secrets. Not exactly hidden, but never spoken aloud. Still, not everyone is fooled. Islamist groups, leftist students, traditional clerics all feel the pressure building. They see a monarch who flirts with foreigners, strangles dissent, and forgets the poor. They see a regime that looks west while ignoring the East, its people, its faith, its past. They don't know it yet, but they're going to explode. One last tidbit before the lights dim further to night ready. For this, in the 1960s, Iran and Israel actually collaborate on a water project in the Kurdish regions of Iraq, a secret op, disguised as charity. Israeli engineers, Iranian logistics, all in a zone Baghdad can't quite control. You couldn't make it up. But that's the nature of geopolitics, isn't it? It's not about who you like. It's about who helps you get what you want. And for now, Iran and Israel want the same thing: survival, influence, and quiet. But the clock is ticking. The desert holds its breath. You're drifting forward again, over the cracked and golden terrain of the 1940s and 50s, fading into the steely confidence of the 1960s. But confidence, as you're about to feel in your bones, is always a fragile thing, especially in the Middle East. World War II may have ended in a blaze of mushroom clouds and tired victory parades, but its aftershocks haven't stopped rumbling. Iran, newly reinstalled with a Western-friendly monarch, is nursing both pride and paranoia. The Shah knows his crown sits precariously atop oil, ambition, and American expectation. Meanwhile, in the little sliver of land to the west, Israel is finding its feet. Still young, still fighting for every inch of security. But something about this post-war, post-Holocaust era has hardened its resolve. You glide over a Tel Aviv that's now bustling, over Haifa's cranes loading ships full of oranges and copper parts. A country trying to function with its back always to the sea. The world, too, is shifting into Cold War logic. Everything becomes a question of, are you with the Americans or the Soviets? Iran throws its lot in with the West. Israel already has, which means, like it or not, the two are now on the same side of history's weirdest tug-of-war. But as the Cold War tightens its grip, another player begins quietly creeping into the region: the Soviet Union. They don't just send guns, they send advisors, ideology, and a taste for revolutions. And while Iran stiffens its spine against communist influence, it also starts playing a double game. Not with Moscow, no, but with Arab neighbors and Palestinian causes. Publicly, the Shah keeps up appearances. Statements against Zionism. Sure, vague support for Palestinian dignity, of course. But beneath the surface, the connection with Israel is humming quietly, building infrastructure, technology, strategy. Then comes 1967, the year everything speeds up. You hover above the region as June dawns hot and brittle. The Six-Day War erupts. Israel launches a preemptive strike against Egypt, Jordan, and Syria and wins so fast it barely makes the week. In less than a week, they triple their land. Gaza, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, the Sinai. It's like watching a chessboard flip mid-match. For Iran's Arab neighbors, this is humiliation. For Israel, it's survival wrapped in swagger. And for Iran, well, Iran watches closely. The Shah doesn't condemn Israel, not forcefully, anyway. He issues vague noises, keeps trade lines open, and tells the West behind closed doors that he's keeping the oil flowing. And here's where things get even more interesting. Iran becomes Israel's most important oil supplier. That's right, an overwhelmingly Muslim country. In the heart of the Islamic world, selling barrels of lifeblood to the Jewish state its neighbors want to erase. Historians still argue whether this was a purely economic decision or a quiet political alliance. Probably both, but the consequences ripple. Iran becomes a critical part of what's called the Periphery Doctrine. This Israeli foreign policy goal focuses on building alliances with non-Arab Muslim states like Iran, Turkey, and Ethiopia to counterbalance Arab hostility. It's the diplomatic version of befriending the quiet kids in class, so the bullies don't T-box you in. Meanwhile, back in Iran, the Shah is dreaming big. Like moon landing big, skyscrapers, high-speed trains, nuclear power. He starts sending students abroad by the thousands, buys tanks by the dozen, holds massive parades with fireworks and ancient Persian themes. You can almost smell the perfume of ambition in the air. But this shiny dream has a crack core 3. Beneath the palaces and imported Cadillacs, unrest is stirring. Conservative clerics mutter about moral decay. Students are growing radicalized. The economy is modernizing too fast for comfort. And the Shah. He's getting more authoritarian by the day. His secret police, Savak, were trained with help from Israel's Mossad and the CIA, and they're very good at making people disappear. You float past one quiet apartment after another, places where whispered dissent is treated like a crime. The state is strong, the voice of opposition weak, but not gone. By now, Israeli and Iranian ties are basically an open secret. Flights operate. Iranian military officers train with Israelis. Agricultural projects, especially in desert farming, thrive because of Israeli know-how. There's even a joint missile project in the works, but there's a twist, a fringe story tucked under the floorboards. Some rumors claim that Mossad helps the Shah track Iranian dissidents abroad, not just communists, but Islamists and leftist exiles. One particularly persistent theory even suggests a young cleric in hiding is being monitored, his name, Ruhollah Khomeini. But that's just chatter, swirling like dust in the diplomatic corridors. Meanwhile, Israel is changing too. With its post-1967 territory gains, it's becoming more confident, maybe too confident. And when the 1973 Yom Kippur War erupts, the world feels the shockwaves. You hover over battlefields as Egyptian and Syrian forces launch a surprise attack. Israeli forces are caught off guard, but rally. The war ends in a kind of grim draw, but the psychological damage runs deep. And in Tehran, the Shah watches carefully. It doesn't stop oil shipments to Israel during the war, and like many Arab nations, it's quietly proud of Iran's role in global oil markets and even prouder of its autonomy. But the war reveals something deeper. The Middle East is no longer a background concern. It is the stage now. That same year, OPEC flexes its muscles. Oil prices skyrocket. Iran's wealth multiplies almost overnight. Suddenly, the Shah has money, ridiculous money, and he spends it like a kid in a candy store made of F-14 jets. But wealth, unchecked, breeds arrogance. And arrogance, well, you know where that goes. By the late 1970s, the cracks are obvious. Protests swell in Iranian cities. Workers strike, clerics speak louder. And in the bazaars, the heart of traditional commerce people whisper the same question over and over. Why is our king more interested in Israel and America than in us? The friendship that once seemed pragmatic now feels alien. Iran's relationship with Israel becomes symbolic of everything that's gone wrong. Elitism, corruption, foreign influence. And still, the Shah doesn't see it. He throws a lavish 2,500-year celebration of the Persian Empire at Persepolis. $100 million spent on a 3-day party in the desert. Caviar, champagne, foreign dignitaries. The kind of event where even the camels feel underdressed. Meanwhile, back in the cities, people starve. People protest. People bleed. You don't hear it yet, but in the mosques, sermons are turning revolutionary. And above them all, in exile, a bearded cleric in a black turban is writing letters. His name is now famous, and his return, unstoppable. the world is about to flip again. But for now, Israel and Iran still pass each other in dimly lit hallways and back-channel deals. Still smiling, still pretending. Because that's the game. Until it isn't. You float now into the swirling dust of 1979, and the air has changed thicker somehow. Electric. Tehran no longer smells of ambition and expensive cologne. It smells of smoke, of anger, of pages torn from textbooks and tossed into fire. The chanting is loud, relentless, rolling like distant thunder through the bazaar, the mosques, the universities, and suddenly you see it. The moment when everything changes. The Shah is gone, fled to Egypt, or America. Or maybe somewhere less visible, does it matter? He's no longer on the peacock throne. And in his place, stepping off a plane from Paris, wrapped in black robes and a silence so loud it roars, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. Your feet touch down on tarmac, still wet from morning rain. Thousands of people are crying, praying, pressing forward. Khomeini doesn't wave, he doesn't smile, just walks, calm as gravity itself, through the noise. Iran has become an Islamic republic and the revolution, still hot from the forge, is about to rewrite the country's soul. Israel, you might expect it to cheer the fall of an authoritarian monarch. But no, quite the opposite. Because for 30 years, the Shah was a reliably secretive partner. Now, that secret alliance is severed with the cold clarity of a guillotine. The new regime in Tehran doesn't just oppose Israelite brands, the enemy. The little Satan. America, of course, is the great one. But Israel is an obsession. It starts immediately. The Israeli diplomatic mission in Tehran, once a discreet suite of offices hidden behind mirrored glasses stormed by revolutionaries. Furniture tossed, papers burned, portraits smashed. And in its place, a brand new embassy. But not for any government. It's for the Palestine Liberation Organization. Imagine it. Israel's former outpost now flying the PLO flag. That's not just symbolic. That's a declaration. The Jewish community in Iran feels the shift instantly. Most aren't Zionists. Many don't care about politics. But it doesn't matter. Fear creeps in like mold under old wallpaper. Within months, thousands emigrate. Some head for the US, some for Europe. A smaller number go to Israel, quietly through third countries. You move through those dimly lit kitchens, through families packing in silence. There's an urgency now. Grandparents whisper prayers. Children stare wide at adults who no longer speak openly. And still, Tehran marches on. Khomeini's new government rewrites the constitution. Power now flows through clerics and revolutionary councils. The tone is puritanical, stern. The morality police appear. Western ties are cut music, fashion, diplomacy. And that includes Israel. Publicly, Tehran becomes one of the most vocal anti-Zionist regimes on earth. It hosts anti-Israel conferences. Declares Quds Day Jerusalem Day a national event. Banners go up in the streets, showing Israeli flags being burned or crushed beneath fists. The language isn't political anymore. It's apocalyptic. But here's the twist that would short-circuit any straightforward story. Israel still tries to reach out. Why? Because just months after the revolution, Iran is invaded. In September 1980, Saddam Hussein's Iraq launches a full-scale assault on Iran. The Iran-Iraq War begins. It's ugly, it's grinding, and it lasts for 8 years. Israel, watching from afar, sees a terrifying scenario. Saddam, a ruthless Arab nationalist with Soviet support, is poised to take over a weakened Iran. And Israel hates Saddam. So what does it do? It makes contact, secretly, carefully. Sometimes through third parties, sometimes directly. Israel begins shipping arms spare parts, ammunition, even light weapons. Not because it likes Khomeini's regime, not even because it thinks Iran will change back, but because in the cold logic of realpolitik, a weakened Iraq is better for Israeli security. Historians still argue how deep this cooperation went. Some claim it was a trickle, others that it was a quiet river flowing through shady dealers and secret warehouses. And then, of course, there's the United States. You've probably heard of the Iran-Contra affair. It sounds like a Tom Clancy novel, but feels more like a bureaucratic fever dream. In the mid-1980s, U.S. officials secretly facilitate arms sales to Iran via Israeli intermediaries. No less, and funnel the profits to anti-communist rebels in Nicaragua. You almost have to laugh. Iran, officially America's enemy, unofficially buying U.S. missiles to fight a war against Iraq, while shouting death to America every Friday. You can't make this up, and yet, here you are, watching it unfold. Back in Tehran, the revolutionary leadership is deeply divided about this strange detour. Some are pragmatists, they see the need to win the war. Others are ideologues, disgusted by any hint of cooperation with Israel or the US. A few key players resign. Others are purged. But the war grinds on, and the public, they're busy surviving. Hundreds of thousands dead, cities shelled, chemical weapons dropped. In the middle of it all, the chants against Israel continue, but they feel less urgent, more performative. Because when your streets are soaked in blood, symbolic enemies fade behind actual ones. Still, the new Islamic Republic continues to build its ideological architecture, and Israel remains firmly, obsessively at the center of its worldview. Khomeini once declared, "The occupying regime of Jerusalem must vanish from the page of time." That line would echo far beyond his death. It isn't just rhetoric, it becomes policy. Iran begins funding groups committed to Israel's destruction. Some already exist. Some are born from this moment. And in Lebanon, something begins to take shape. But not yet. We'll come to that. For now, Israel watches Iran slip farther away. What began as a covert friendship, full of plausible deniability and mutual gain, has become open hostility. Iranian leaders accuse Israel of every possible evil, from colonialism to immorality to secret global manipulation. And Israel is no longer trying to be subtle. In 1982, during its invasion of Lebanon, Israel claims it's targeting PLO strongholds, but it's also sending a signal to Iran, to Syria, to anyone paying attention. Israel will not be surrounded, and by now, the region understands something else. This isn't just political, it's ideological. Iran's regime doesn't want a two-state solution or a security deal. It wants to erase Israel as a state, as an idea. It sees Zionism as a colonial wound on the body of Islam, not just unjust, but unnatural. And this isn't going to fade. Iran's leaders don't change, even as power shifts from clerics to technocrats and back again. The message stays firm. Israel is illegitimate. Period. You float now over the borderlands, the no man's land between Lebanon and Israel. Something is growing there. A movement, a militia, a whisper with teeth. And soon, Iran will nurture it like a favored child. But tonight, as Tehran settles into another prayerful evening and Tel Aviv's nightclubs flicker back to life, you realize something. What began as indifference became alliance, became betrayal, has now crystallized into something worse, an obsession. You slip deeper now into the 1980s, where desert air crackles with tension and the Mediterranean wind carries more than salt whispers, gunpowder, secrets. The friendship once shared between Iran and Israel is not just broken, it's inverted. A photograph flipped to its negative. What was once quietly beneficial is now publicly hostile. But here's the thing, hostility in the Middle East is rarely pure. Israel isn't done with Iran. Not really. And Iran. It's at war with Sodom, with the West, with the entire concept of secular modernity. But war costs money. War needs parts. Planes don't fly on ideology alone. So you hover back to the early 1980s. It's a period where everything is on fire and nobody admits to holding the match. The Iran-Iraq War rages. It's trench warfare, chemical attacks, and teenage soldiers running through minefields with plastic keys around their necks meant to unlock paradise. Saddam uses Western weapons. Iran scrambles for anything it can get. Cue Israel. Despite the screaming chants from Tehran's mosques, Israeli officials approve clandestine arms sales. The logic, a weakened Iraq is better than a victorious one. And better still, Iran's forces are depleting fast. So, somewhere in Europe, Israeli-made weapons are boxed in neutral crates. Somewhere else, aircraft parts are quietly diverted. Israeli officials pretend it isn't happening. Iranian buyers pretend not to notice the Hebrew labels. Bizarre, cynical dance. And in Washington? Well, Washington gets involved in its own strange way. It starts with a small, almost unbelievable idea. What if we could use arms to build influence with Iran and use that influence to free American hostages in Lebanon? That idea becomes the Iran-Contra affair. Here's the nutshell. The US sells arms to Iran. Iran promises to help release hostages held by Hezbollah. The profits from those sales, they're sent to anti-communist rebels in Nicaragua, completely against US law. It's like laundering ideology through a washing machine filled with missiles. And Israel plays the middleman, facilitates transfers, smiles politely, shrugs when asked. Officially, it's still the devil in Iranian speeches. But unofficially, it's a lifeline. Historians still argue whether these arms deals prolonged the Iran-Iraq War. Some say they saved Iran from collapse. Others argue they changed nothing except the hypocrisy index. You float now through a quiet warehouse in Tel Aviv. A clipboard ticks off crates, and official signs in silence. Somewhere, a cargo plane is waiting on a runway with its lights dimmed. And in Tehran, a Revolutionary Guard colonel unwraps a package with gloved hands, lips pressed into a line. Nobody smiles. But the deal is done. Quirky side note, one of the weapons Israel sends is the TOW anti-tank missile. Yepsky, the same missile that would later be used against Israeli tanks in Lebanon. Because, as always, history has a sense of irony so sharp it might cut your dreams. And speaking of Lebanon, while this strange triangle of Iran, Israel, America plays out behind closed doors, something more permanent is growing just north of Israel's border. A movement, a militia, a vision. Its name is Hezbollah. It's formed in the early 1980s with the help of Iran's Revolutionary Guard. Hezbollah begins as a resistance movement against Israeli occupation in southern Lebanon. But it quickly becomes more than that. It's an ideology, a political party, a military force, and Iran is its patron saint. Hezbollah's messages are clear and often printed on grainy VHS tapes smuggled across borders. Israel must go. Palestine must be freed. Martyrdom is not the end, it's the beginning. For Iran, Hezbollah is the perfect proxy. It bleeds Israel without risking Iranian lives. It exports the revolution. It gives Tehran influence in a volatile, crucial region. For Israel, Hezbollah is a nightmare with a beard and a Kalashnikov. Throughout the mid-80s, skirmishes increase. Kidnappings, bombings, roadside ambushes. The psychological toll is enormous. Israel begins building a security zone in southern Lebanon, a military buffer, but it only adds fuel to Hezbollah's fire. You drift beside Israeli soldiers on patrol. The road winds through banana groves and stone houses. Every shadow could be a sniper. Every boy watching from a rooftop might be holding a radio, whispering your coordinates. Back in Tehran, Hezbollah fighters are celebrated as heroes. Posters show their faces beside Quranic verses. Money flows. Training continues. A pipeline of ideology and ammunition stretches from the mountains of Iran to the valleys of Lebanon. And meanwhile, Israel begins hardening. The friendly, scrappy nation of the 50s has grown into a regional power with a steel jaw. Its intelligence services are ruthless. Its military doctrine is never again, never cornered. The country starts to view Iran not just as an ideological enemy, but as a strategic threat, especially after 1988, when the Iran-Iraq War ends in a hollow ceasefire. Neither side wins, everyone loses. But Iran survives, and survival, in this case, is its own kind of victory. Khomeini dies the next year, in 1989. His funeral draws millions. You hover above the sea of black-clad mourners, wailing, fists raised. His successor, Ali Khamenei, takes the mantle of supreme leader. And unlike his mentor, Khamenei is quieter, colder, more calculating, and absolutely committed to the same revolutionary principles. Among them, the annihilation of Israel. Iran begins to expand its network of influence. It doesn't just support Hezbollah, it starts building connections with Palestinian Islamic Jihad, with elements of Hamas, with Shia militias in Iraq, all while publicly insisting that these are just resistance groups. Israel, of course, isn't buying it. By the early 90s, Israeli officials are openly labeling Iran as the greatest threat to regional peace. And this time, it's not about tanks or border skirmishes. It's about something far more terrifying. A single word whispered in security briefings and printed in UN resolutions: nuclear. But don't jump ahead just yet. That shadow is still forming on the horizon. For now, the dance continues. Iran grows bolder. Israel grows more wary. And both pretend, on some level, that war remains avoidable. But you feel it, don't you? That eerie stillness. The kind that settles over a desert just before the storm. Because the old days of covert cooperation are not just over. They're radioactive. And the game ahead is not about alliances anymore. It's about survival. You drift into the 1990s now, a decade bookended by collapse and prophecy. The Cold War is over. The Berlin Wall has crumbled like a stale cracker. America stands alone at the top of the geopolitical food chain, waving its stars and stripes like a full-color victory screen. But in the Middle East, nothing feels resolved. Nothing ever does. And if you look closely, right in the fading glow of the Gulf War, you'll see a pattern. Israel and Iran locked in the same cold, bitter dance. The gloves are off, but the punches are still indirect. In 1991, Iraq's Saddam Hussein launches missiles into Israel during the Gulf War, hoping to drag it into the conflict and fracture the U.S.-Arab alliance. Israel doesn't retaliate on U.S. request, but Iran watches carefully. The message is clear. Israel is still vulnerable. Missiles work. The psychological effect alone is delicious to Tehran. By now, Iran's revolutionary identity is fully institutionalized. Ayatollah Khomeini is settled in as supreme leader. The Revolutionary Guard has grown into a political and economic behemoth. And the hostility toward Israel is no longer about mere slogans. It's baked into the state's DNA. You hover above Friday's sermons in Tehran, where the death to Israel chants are as ritualized as the call to prayer. Banners hang in traffic circles, showing the Israeli flag with a red X slashed through it. Quds Day rallies fill the streets each year, a sea of fists and placards and anger. But while the slogans boom, the real battle is happening in quieter corridors. Iran has become the main supplier of money, weapons, and ideological oxygen to anti-Israel groups in Gaza and Lebanon. Most notably, Hamas. Yes, Hamas. It might seem strange at first. Hamas is Sunni Islamist. Iran is Shia. Theologically, they should glare at each other from across centuries of disagreement. But geopolitics, once again, proves more flexible than theology. Both hate Israel. That's enough. Iran sees Hamas as a way to keep Israel bleeding from the inside. Rockets, tunnels, targeted bombings. It doesn't need to be militarily decisive, just emotionally exhausting. a low-grade fever that never breaks. In response, Israel doubles down on security. You drift over the first layers of what will become the separation wall, giant slabs of concrete slicing through the West Bank like gray scars. Checkpoints multiply. Intelligence budgets balloon. The Mossad and Shin Bet are busier than ever, tracking Iranian influence in Gaza, Lebanon, Syria, even Africa. And while all this is happening, Iran's nuclear ambitions start to stir. Quietly, methodically. In 1995, Iran signs a contract with Russia to build a civilian nuclear reactor in Bushehr. Officially, it's about energy. But come on, you feel it in your gut. This isn't just about electricity, it's about leverage, about status. About creating a deterrent so powerful that no one, even Israel, would dare. Though historians still argue when Iran's nuclear program really turned toward weapons. Some say it was always intended that way. Others suggest it hardened after Saddam's fall in 2003. But in the 90s, it's still vague, still deniable. But Israel isn't buying the denials. You hover in an Israeli intelligence meeting where officials trace maps with red markers, argue over satellite images, pass dossiers heavy with grainy photographs and intercepted faxes. Bushehr, they mutter. Natanz, Eric. These names are becoming code for something darker, and they're planning. Meanwhile, the relationship between Israel and the United States tightens. The U.S. sees Iran as a rogue state, a sponsor of terror, a disruptor of peace efforts in the region. So, together, Israel and America start isolating Iran. Sanctions tighten, pressure mounts. At the same time, a quirky but telling episode unfolds. In 1992, Israel and Iran both send athletes to the Summer Olympics in Barcelona. But when the Iranian athlete is scheduled to face an Israeli in judo, he forfeits. Not injured, not unprepared. Just refuses to compete. A gesture of pure ideology. You wouldn't think sports could symbolize decades of tension, but there it is, right on the mat, unplayed. This gesture becomes a pattern. Iranian athletes will continue to dodge Israeli opponents for decades. It's petty, sure, but it's also policy. And this period, the late 90s, brings one more strange twist. A new Iranian president takes office in 1997. Mohammad Khatami, a reformist, a soft-spoken intellectual who talks about dialogue among civilizations. The West listens. Maybe, just maybe, Iran is softening. But Israel isn't fooled. Khatami may smile, but the Revolutionary Guard is still pumping cash into Hezbollah and Hamas. The missile program is still growing. And those nuclear facilities still under construction. You float beside the growing friction in the Israeli cabinet. Some argue that Iran is bluffing. Others insist it's only a matter of time before something irreversible happens. And among them is a younger, steelier Benjamin Netanyahu, ready ringing alarms about Iran's ambitions. Loudly, often with a kind of grim certainty that becomes his trademark. Meanwhile, back in Iran, the Jewish community, what remains of ITs, navigating a tightrope. Most have left, but some stay. The Islamic Republic officially recognizes Judaism as a protected religion. But anti-Zionism bleeds into something darker. In 1999, 13 Iranian Jews are arrested on espionage charges, accused of spying for Israel. It's never proven, but the arrests rattle nerves. Global Jewish communities protest. Tehran insists it's about law, not persecution. But the message is clear. The line between Jew and Zionist is getting blurrier. Still, some Jewish Iranians remain. Run businesses, even hold seats in parliament. It's complicated. Iran isn't Nazi Germany, but it isn't France either. And as the decade closes, you feel it, a hum of approaching crisis. Iran's nuclear facilities are expanding. Hezbollah is more powerful than ever. Hamas has dug in. And Israel is watching all of it, head tilted, fingers flexing. This isn't the rivalry of the 50s, born of quiet meetings and oil tankers. This is something colder, sharper, more existential. It's not about what either side wants, it's about what they refuse to tolerate. And as the 21st century dawns with cell phones buzzing, satellites watching, and threats moving from desert trenches to uranium centrifuges, one truth becomes clear. The rivalry is no longer about yesterday, it's about tomorrow. You drift gently into the early 2000s, a decade that begins with shattered glass and ends with glowing screens. The world is blinking, shaken, coughing up dust from the collapse of the Twin Towers. And somewhere in that chaos, the Iran-Israel rivalry slides from the shadows and takes center stage. September 11th, 2001, the planes hit. The towers fall, and everything changes. Not directly between Israel and Iran, not yet. But the global order begins to warp. America turns its gaze full throttle toward the Middle East. Afghanistan is first. Iraq follows in 2003. And in the background, always watching, are Tehran and Jerusalem, both recalculating their odds. Iran sees opportunity. With Saddam Hussein's old enemy gone, a power vacuum opens. Tehran wastes no time. Its Revolutionary Guard slips across the border, planting seeds. Allies, militias. Influence, Iraq. Once a wall between Iran and the Arab world becomes a highway. Shia parties rise. Pro-Iranian militias gain weapons and funds. The U.S., distracted by insurgency and failure to find those pesky WMDs, lets it happen. And Israel sees the writing on the wall. Yes, Saddam is gone. But now Iran is inching closer, strategically and geographically. And worse, its nuclear ambitions are no longer theoretical. In 2002, a dissident Iranian group drops a bombshell. Not an actual bomb, but something almost as explosive. Details about Natanz, a secret uranium enrichment facility buried beneath Iranian soil. And just like that, the world wakes up. Israel's intelligence community, particularly Mossad, has long suspected something. But now there's proof. Centrifuges, enrichment, a plan to move beyond energy into weapons-grade material. This isn't just about suspicion anymore, it's a race. You float over Jerusalem as leaders huddle in briefings. Over Tehran, where engineers in lab coats tap keyboards and monitor radiation levels. The air is heavy with words like threshold, deterrent, preemptive strike. And here's where things get weirder again. Despite Iran's growing defiance, the international community is slow to respond. There are UN reports, sure, IAEA inspections, but Tehran keeps dancing just within legal bounds. It claims peaceful intent, offers to negotiate, then pulls back, then comes forward again. A diplomatic hokey-pokey with uranium dust on its shoes. Meanwhile, Israel's alarm bells are screaming. A nuclear Iran in Israeli strategic thinking isn't just a threat, it's a potential endgame. The country's geography doesn't offer much strategic depth. One or two nukes, and it's existential. So Israel prepares for ... options. Military planners draft scenarios. War games play out on screens in Tel Aviv. Air routes to Natanz are charted, pilot rosters reviewed, fuel capacity tested. Mossad gets busy, really busy. And right about here, you get one of the strangest, most futuristic moments in this whole rivalry. The Stuxnet worm. It's 2009-ish, maybe earlier. The timeline's a little fuzzy, and that's on purpose. But here's the gist. A computer virus, so advanced it behaves almost like a ghost, is introduced into Iran's nuclear facility at Natanz. It doesn't destroy buildings. It doesn't crash the grid. It does something far sneakier. It tells the centrifuges to spin too fast, then slow, then fast again, enough to damage them. It doesn't announce itself. It leaves engineers puzzled. It leaves data scrambled. And most importantly, it delays everything. Historians still argue who wrote the worm. but the most accepted theory: a joint operation between Israel and the United States. It's not science fiction. It's cyber sabotage in a shadow war where keyboards are just as dangerous as tanks. While the world debates whether Iran has a bomb, Israel keeps shaping the answer. You float through Tehran's control rooms, where blinking lights tell half-truths. Through Mossad headquarters, where a quiet war is being fought across screens. Through the halls of the IAEA in Vienna, where exhausted diplomats try to keep up with two countries locked in a game that's part chess, part chicken. Meanwhile, Hezbollah is growing bolder. From southern Lebanon, rockets continue to fly into northern Israel. Short range, annoying, but effective. And every time Israel responds with airstrikes, with incursions, celebrates Hezbollah's resilience. Money keeps flowing, so do weapons. One quirky, underreported moment. In 2006, during the Second Lebanon War, Israeli forces capture Iranian-made night vision equipment from Hezbollah bunkers. It's like finding a manufacturer's label on a punch to the face. No more deniability. Israel's government hardens. Benjamin Netanyahu, re-elected in 2009, makes Iran's nuclear program his thing, his warning, his platform. He brings it up in speeches, interviews, even at the UN, famously holding up a cartoon bomb diagram like a kindergarten show about Armageddon. It's easy to mock, but the concern, it's real. Back in Tehran, Ahmadinejad is now president, and he's flamboyant. Known for denying the Holocaust, ranting about Israel's illegitimacy, and wearing the same cheap suit on world stages. His rhetoric is fire and brimstone. And Israel treats him as a genuine threat, even if some Iranian elites see him as more show than substance. Still, the nuclear clock keeps ticking. And here's where things escalate, again quietly, lethally. Between 2010 and 2012, at least 4 Iranian nuclear scientists are assassinated. Motorcycles pull up in traffic, sticky bombs attached to car doors. Explosions, clean exits. No claims of responsibility, of course, but everyone knows the likely suspects. Israel doesn't admit it. Iran doesn't forgive it. And the world watches, stunned, as a high-stakes campaign of targeted killing unfolds not on battlefields, but on Tehran's boulevards. Some analysts call it the shadow war, but for the people caught in it, there's nothing shadowy about it at all. And through it all, the Israeli public starts to shift. You float through markets in Tel Aviv, where grocers talk about bomb shelters. Through classrooms where kids practice drills, not for earthquakes, but for missiles. Iran is no longer a distant concept. It's a daily anxiety. And in Iran, it's the opposite. Israel becomes a symbol, a totem of defiance. Anti-Israel murals adorn public squares. Student protests burn effigies. State television runs documentaries about Zionist plots. The obsession isn't just geopolitical, it's cultural now. Generational. Yet underneath all this fire, the two countries remain weirdly connected. Not diplomatically, not even covertly at this point, but in the way to planets orbit the same star. Every move one makes, the other feels. Every speech, every airstrike, every policy shift ripples across the divide. It's no longer just a rivalry, it's a mirror. Each sees in the other what it fears becoming. Israel fears religious extremism, apocalyptic ideology, unchecked rage. Iran fears westernization, secularism, foreign manipulation. Each accuses the other of crimes it half suspects in itself and the rest of the world. It walks a tightrope between them. Sanctions, negotiations, drone strikes, threats, treaties, then threats again. You can't help but notice. The longer this goes on, the more each side depends on the rivalry itself to justify its identity. Without Israel, Iran's revolution loses its great enemy. Without Iran, Israel loses its existential purpose. But don't worry, there's plenty more drama ahead. Deals, betrayals, covert missions in unlikely places. You're only just reaching the halfway point, and the centrifuges, they're still spinning. You're gliding now into the 2010s, where the buzz of the modern world wraps tightly around an ancient feud. Smartphones glow, memes fly, satellites map everything in absurd detail land. Yet between Iran and Israel, it's still war. Just not the kind with flags and formal declarations. It's quieter now, smarter, dirtier. They call it asymmetric warfare, the art of hitting your enemy where they're vulnerable, not where they're strong. And by now, both Iran and Israel have mastered it like chess grandmasters who don't speak but understand each other's every move. You start this leg of the journey floating high above Damascus. Below, Syria is unraveling. In 2011, protests became part of the Arab Spring. But here, they don't lead to reform or regime change. They lead to war, civil war. And like vultures spotting a wounded animal, both Iran and Israel move in. Not as direct combatants, but as shadows. Iran rushes to support Bashar al-Assad, Syria's embattled president. Not because he's charming, he's not, but because he offers strategic real estate. Keep Assad in power, and Iran retains access to Lebanon, to Hezbollah, to the Mediterranean. So the Iranian Revolutionary Guard sends advisors, weapons, money, and eventually entire proxy militias, Afghan fighters, Iraqi Shia units, Hezbollah troops. A multinational effort with one clear goal: keep Assad alive and keep Israel on edge. Israel, it watches then acts. You drift now into the thunder of the campaign between the wars, Israel's unofficial name for its strikes in Syria. Over the 2010s, Israel launches hundreds of airstrikes targeting Iranian positions, weapons, convoys, and Hezbollah installations across Syria. They don't always confirm it, but the explosions speak for themselves. Boom, Damascus suburb. Boom, Hezbollah arms depot near the Golan Heights. Boom, Iranian convoy accidentally caught in traffic. This is not full-scale war. This is pressure, precision, warnings dressed as fireballs, and back in Tehran, they keep going anyway. Because the logic is simple, we're playing the long game. Iran isn't trying to defeat Israel in a single war. It's trying to surround it, to bleed it slowly, to make any Israeli action expensive, exhausting, politically risky. And Israel is racing to keep the circle from closing. One mainstream fact that gets repeated a lot this decade: Israel has the most advanced air force in the region. F-35 jets, laser-guided everything. Air superiority like a hawk over a mouse field. But asymmetric warfare isn't impressed by hardware. It's impressed by patience. Iran continues building influence across Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Gaza. What some Israeli analysts start calling the Shia Crescent. You float over that crescent now, Tehran, to Baghdad, to Damascus, to Beirut, connected by roads, fighters, and ideology. To Israel, it looks like a noose. To Iran, it's a corridor of power. And through all this, the nuclear issue refuses to go away. After years of tension, threats, and IAEA reports that sound like bureaucratic poetry, something unexpected happens: a deal. In 2015, Iran signs the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action with the US, UK, France, China, Russia, Germany, and, yes, the EU gets its own mention too. The terms: Iran agrees to limit uranium enrichment, reduce centrifuges, allow inspections, and in return, gets relief from crippling sanctions. The world exhales. Well, most of the world. Israel does not. Benjamin Netanyahu, still prime minister and still grimly focused on Iran, hates the deal. Calls it a historic mistake. Warns that it only delays Iran's nuclear program and doesn't dismantle it. He even addresses the US Congress directly, bypassing the White House in a speech that feels less like diplomacy and more like a fire drill. Historians still argue whether Netanyahu's opposition was strategic brilliance or political theatrics. Either way, the rift is real. You hover through the corridors of power in Washington. where policymakers weigh Iran's cooperation against Israel's warnings. Through Tehran's labs, where enrichment slows, but not entirely. Through Israel's security briefings, where skepticism glows brighter than radar screens. And then, the surprise. In 2018, under President Trump, the US withdraws from the nuclear deal. Just pulls out. Sanctions return. Iran seethes. Europe flinches. Israel applauds. But that's not all. Because just a few months later, Mossad pulls off one of the boldest operations in modern intelligence history. They break into a warehouse in Tehran and steal half a ton of nuclear documents. Not fake data, not digital traces. Actual binders and CDs. Thousands of files detailing Iran's nuclear history, some dating back to the pre-2003 program. They exfiltrate everything in one night, drive it out, fly it home. Then they hold a press conference and show the world. You can almost hear the collective gasp. Even Iran doesn't deny it outright, just says it was old information. But for Israel, it's vindication. Proof that Iran had lied. That the deal was, as they warned, a delaying tactic. And back in Tehran, there's silence, then defiance. Iran resumes enrichment. Gradually, then more openly. Centrifuges spin faster. Stockpiles increase. The deal unravels. The nuclear clock ticks again. Meanwhile, the cyber war heats up. Stuxnet was just the beginning. Now both countries target each other: digitally electric grids, transport systems, even civilian infrastructure. In 2020, mysterious fires erupt at Iranian facilities. Water systems in Israeli cities are hacked. No one admits anything, but the war is digital now, and it's constant. Then, in late 2020, a shadow falls over Iran's nuclear program. Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, the father of Iran's nuclear weapons project, is assassinated outside Tehran. Reports suggest it was done with a remote-controlled machine gun, possibly a IS-assisted, fired from a parked vehicle. Israeli fingerprints are suspected. Iran vows revenge. Another scientist gone. Another message sent. But even in this darkness, something shifts. Just a few months earlier, in a separate dimension of politics, Israel signs the Abraham Accords, normalizing ties with the UAE, Bahrain, and later Morocco and Sudan. Arab nations that once wouldn't say Israel on TV now host its diplomats. Iran sees this as encirclement. You drift now across the Persian Gulf, where Iranian naval boats buzz past Emirati oil platforms. Cross Saudi airfields, where Israeli defense systems are whispered about. Cross a region realigning itself at warp speed. And yet, for all the fireworks, the real battle remains psychological. In Tel Aviv, a new generation grows up with missile alerts and gas masks. In Tehran, another generation hears that Israel is behind every hardship, every sanction, every humiliation. Neither side truly knows the other anymore. What began as a quiet alliance has morphed into a multi-generational myth: two nations wrapped in fear, prophecy, and the echo of decisions made by leaders long gone. You pause briefly, above the desert, where the silence is thick and golden. Because you know something both sides seem to forget. Rivalries age, they calcify. And when they're this deep, this historical, this worn into the DNA of states, they become almost impossible to end. You hover now above the year 2021, a time when the world is staggering out of a global pandemic, blinking at the sun like a prisoner just released. And yet, between Iran and Israel, the tension hasn't softened. If anything, the pandemic gave both sides more room to maneuver in the shadows, while the rest of the planet was busy washing hands and hoarding toilet paper. The shadow war is no longer a subplot to the main act. Let's start with the assassinations. They haven't stopped. In fact, they're getting more surgical, more sci-fi. You remember Fakhrizadeh? The nuclear scientist shot by what some reports called a satellite-linked, AI-driven remote machine gun. That kind of operation isn't just a warning, it's a flex. It tells Iran, we know where you are, we know what you're doing, and we can reach you. Iran responds the only way it knows how, with a mix of rage and strategy. On one hand, it shouts to the skies, vowing revenge. On the other, it doubles down on the program. You slip now into the gleaming hallways beneath Natanz, Iran's most notorious enrichment facility. Security has tightened, walls reinforced. Centrifuges spin faster, some of them now advanced IR-6 models, capable of enriching uranium quicker than their older cousins. The IAEA, the perpetually polite nuclear watchdog, raises concerns, issues statements, but the story is the same. Iran is moving closer to weapons-grade enrichment. And Israel is watching with the intensity of a hawk caffeinated to the edge of madness. In April 2021, just when Iran seems to be speeding toward a nuclear threshold, Natanz suffers a mysterious blackout. Sabotage, almost certainly cyber. Likely Israeli. Iran confirms electrical damage. The world nods knowingly. Another delay. Another line crossed. Historians still argue whether these attacks slow Iran down or just make it dig in deeper. One fringe theory even suggests that constant Israeli sabotage is what convinces Iran it has to go nuclear just to stop being a target. It's a paradox worthy of Kafka, or the Middle East. Meanwhile, a new player steps into Israel's leadership. Naftali Bennett. He's not Netanyahu, but don't confuse that with softness. Bennett, a former tech entrepreneur and elite commando, brings a very Israeli blend of innovation and grit. He continues the same policy: keep Iran's nuclear ambitions in check by any means necessary. And here's where things get straight ships. Throughout 2021 and 2022, mysterious attacks on oil tankers, cargo vessels, and civilian logistics ships begin occurring across the Persian Gulf, the Arabian Sea, even up into the Red Sea. Sometimes it's limpet mines, sometimes drones, occasionally missiles. Everyone's quiet, but the fingerprints, familiar. Israel hits an Iranian ship said to be used for intelligence gathering. Iran hits an Israeli-linked tanker near Oman. One Israeli-owned vessel is struck with a drone, killing 2 crew members, including a British guard. The UK and US blame Iran. The sea, once just a trade route, is now part of the chessboard. But it's not just the waters getting tense. The skies are buzzing too. Iran's drone program has gone from backyard project to legitimate military wing. You drift past underground drone factories in Iran, where engineers assemble suicide drones with plastic shells and GPS brains. They're cheap, effective, and can travel far into Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, even Israel. In 2021, Israeli air defenses start intercepting drones approaching from the east, some apparently launched from Iraqi territory by Iran-backed militias. These aren't long-range ballistic missiles, they're stealthier. And for Israel, they're an alarm bell. So Israel upgrades. Iron Dome is joined by David Sling, Arrow, and even Iron Beam, a prototype laser defense system designed to burn drones out of the sky. No joke, we are officially in Star Wars territory. Meanwhile, in Iran, Ibrahim Raisi becomes president, a hardliner. Former judge, known as the Butcher of Tehran by critics. He makes no effort to soften the regime's stance on Israel. In fact, he leans in. We will not negotiate our defense, he declares. Which, when translated from diplomat speak, means we'll keep enriching uranium and funding Hezbollah. Thanks for asking. And Hezbollah, they're now armed to the teeth. Estimates suggest over 100,000 rockets aimed south. Nestled in valleys, garages, even under schools. Precision-guided, capable of reaching. Tel Aviv, Iran has invested in helping Hezbollah turn their arsenal from spray and pray to point and burn. Israel knows. Which is why Israeli jets keep hitting Damascus International Airport. Military convoys, weapons depots, every week it seems. A slow-motion war kept just below the level that would trigger full-scale escalation. And yet, the Israeli public lives with that constant thrum of tension. You drift through a summer concert in Haifa, where halfway through the performance, a missile siren wails. People scatter, but it's routine now terror mixed with normalcy. Same in Iran. You wander through a Tehran bazaar, where the conversation flips easily between inflation and the latest Israeli strike. Posters of Qasem Soleimani still hang, martyred to the US drone strike in 2020. But his legacy has mutated into one of regional reach. He's the architect of Iran's proxies. But here's the strange twist. While leaders rage, the people are weary. Polls in Israel show a generation more focused on housing, climate, and TikTok than military strikes. In Iran, sanctions have hollowed out the economy, and ordinary folks just want internet access, that dosan tea, buffer and bread, that dosan tea cost a day as wages. Still, the regimes grind forward. One opens scholarly debate whether this rivalry has become self-perpetuating. That is, both sides now need each other as ideological foils. Israel points to Iran to justify its security apparatus. Iran uses Israel to keep its revolutionary fervor alive. Remove one, and the narrative scaffolding begins to crumble. And through it all, there's a weird, semi-taboo thread of nostalgia. Older Iranians remember the 1970s Israeli agricultural engineers working in Shiraz, LL flights landing in Tehran, quiet partnerships on irrigation and oil. Some Israeli military retirees still remember the training exercises with pre-revolution Iranian officers. It was real, it happened, but now, those memories are ghosts. You float past university campuses in both countries where students are too young to remember anything but enmity. In textbooks, the other side is always wrong, evil, threatening. There's no mention of nuance, no footnotes about friendship. It's just enemy silhouettes, repeated in every news cycle, burned into the national psyche like permanent ink. And the future? Well, it's not finished writing itself yet. Iran's enrichment continues. Israel's strikes intensify. New technologies, hypersonic missiles, AI surveillance, quantum hacking loom on the horizon. The rivalry is adapting, evolving, infecting every domain of modern warfare. You begin to wonder, what would it take to stop this? A new revolution? A shared external threat? An accident so catastrophic it shakes both nations awake? Or maybe, nothing can stop it now. Maybe this is what happens when stories run too long without editing, when mistrust hardens into mythology. And as you drift once more over the ancient hills of the Levant and the vast deserts of Persia, you realize something else. The quietest part of this war is also the most powerful. The story both sides keep telling themselves. You drift into the present, sort of not quite yesterday, not quite tomorrow. That strange twilight of recent memory, where news headlines haven't settled into textbooks yet, and Iran and Israel, they're still at it. Same desert dance, same game of shadows. But now the stakes feel sharper, more personal. As if both sides have grown tired of pretending this isn't real war. Let's start with the nuclear clock, because, yes, it's still ticking. By 2023, Iran has enriched uranium to 60% purity, closer than ever to weapons grade. For context, civilian nuclear fuel is around 3 to 5%. Weapons grade is 90%. So 60%. That's a loaded gun without a finger on the trigger. Israel watches, nervous, angry, determined, and the US, caught between Iranian defiance and Israeli urgency, tries again to float the idea of a new deal. A less for less arrangement. Iran pauses enrichment a bit, gets some sanctions relief. Nothing formal, nothing signed. Just handshakes under the table. But in Israel, there's no patience left for diplomacy. Benjamin Netanyahu, yes, still returns as prime minister. His coalition is the most hardline in Israeli history, and on Iran, he's all thunder, no umbrella. He's convinced that Iran is sprinting for the bomb under cover of negotiations, that they'll play rope-a-dope diplomacy until the centrifuges are humming like a beehive on espresso. So Israel steps up the shadow war again. You float into Isfahan, Iran's heartland. In January 2023, a major drone attack hits a military facility near the city. The target, reportedly a weapons production site. No group claims responsibility, but the whispers say Mossad. Always Mossad. The drones. Small quadcopters, cheap, agile, civilian-looking. One Iranian official even mutters, off the record, they looked like something you'd buy on Amazon. Welcome to 21st century warfare, where kids' toys deliver sabotage. And Iran, it hits back. Not always with missiles, sometimes with cyber, sometimes with proxies. You drift through Erbil, in Iraqi Kurdistan, where an Israeli spy base is rumored to exist. Iran launches missiles there in 2022, claiming to strike a Mossad compound. Proof? Not really. But that's the rhythm now. Strike, deny, retaliate, repeat. This back and forth is a low boil. Just under the surface of war, and yet, people die, systems fail, economies crack, and the tension spreads into places no one expected. Like Azerbaijan. Yes, Azerbaijan, a majority Muslim, secular, Turkic-speaking country north of Iran, and quietly friendly with Israel. Israel sells them drones. Lots of drones. Weapons, training. And during the 2020 Nagorno-Karabakh War, those Israeli drones help Azerbaijan decisively beat Armenian forces. Iran isn't thrilled. Why? Because Azerbaijan sits on Iran's northern border. And inside Iran, there's a large Azerbaijani minority. Tehran fears separatism, cultural contagion, and, most of all, Israeli presence that close to home. So Iran holds military drills along the border, warns Azerbaijan. And behind the scenes, Israeli-Azeri intelligence cooperation becomes Tehran's new migraine. It's not just drones flying now, it's alliances shifting. Quietly, calculatedly. You hover across Saudi Arabia, once Iran's archenemy, now slowly flirting with. And yet, even amid Saudi-on talks, the Saudis still view Iran's nuclear program as a threat. And Israel, they're holding closed-door meetings. Airspace cooperation, shared radar. Mutual enemies make strange bedfellows. And then, perhaps the strangest twist in this whole saga, Iranian and Israeli citizens online start talking. Not government officials, not diplomats, ordinary people. On Twitter, Persian and Hebrew hashtags mingle. Iranian dissidents reach out to Israelis. Israelis post messages of solidarity during Iranian protests. They joke, meme, share music. Your enemy is not us, one Iranian woman posts. It's the men sending you to war, an Israeli replies. I don't want to bomb you. I want to drink pomegranate juice in Isfahan. It's surreal and fleeting. But it happens. Because even as missiles fly, even as centrifuges spin and operatives vanish in alleyways, both peoples carry a flicker of exhaustion. A whisper of, what if we just ... stopped. But the governments have no such whispers. Especially when, in 2023, the regional situation erupts again in Gaza. The latest round of fighting between Israel and Islamic Jihad sees Iranian fingerprints everywhere. Funding, strategy. Rockets. Israel responds with airstrikes. Civilian casualties mount. Iran condemns. Rinse and repeat. But something's different now. Israel doesn't just blame Gaza. It blames Tehran openly for remote controlling the chaos. Statements from Israeli officials go beyond veiled threats. They're direct. If Iran pushes us, we will strike inside Iran. And for the first time in years, serious analysts start gaming out full-scale confrontation. You glide over policy rooms where military planners map routes to Iran's nuclear sites. Natanz, Fordo, Eric. The question, E-Sin. T. If Israel can hit them, Eds, how long they can hold off before they must. Meanwhile, Iran moves its uranium to deeper facilities, mountain bunkers, buried fortresses. Their goal is clear. Make any Israeli strike costly, maybe impossible. Historians still argue whether Israel would ever truly launch a solo strike. The 1981 attack on Iraq's Asyric reactor and the 2007 bombing of Syria's secret nuclear site show they're willing. But Iran is bigger, stronger, more prepared. And then there's the wild card, the United States. Under the Biden administration, U.S.-Israel ties remain tight but less starry-eyed. America wants regional calm, but it also wants to avoid war with Iran. And so, it walks a careful line talking tough on nukes, but stopping short of endorsing a strike. Israel increasingly says, we'll act alone if we must. Iran dares them. Because underneath the layers of military planning and strategic chess, the psychological war continues. Iran wants the world to believe it's unstoppable. Israel wants the world to believe it's unbreakable. Both are projecting strength, but both are also terrified of what comes next. You float now over Tel Aviv, where gas masks are distributed quietly to residents, just in case. You drift through Tehran, where murals still show missiles raining down on imaginary Israeli cities, just in case. And through it all, a tension hums in the background. Not panic, not peace. Something in between. A war that never fully starts, never truly stops. And while the world spins forward climate crisis, AI revolutions, pandemics, collapsing economies, these two nations remain locked. It's not just in conflict, but in a kind of historical gravity. They pull each other into focus, define each other's nightmares, fuel each other's politics. You might call it a feud, a rivalry, a clash of civilizations. But at this point, it's a relationship. You're floating now in a strange kind of silence, a moment between storms. The missiles haven't flown today. The news isn't screaming in bold red banners. The centrifuges still hum under Iranian mountains. The Iron Dome still scans Israel's skies. But everything feels paused, like the world is inhaling deeply, not sure if it'll exhale with diplomacy or detonation. This is the part where everything gets more philosophical. Because by now, it's clear, Iran and Israel are no longer just nations with a conflict. Their ideas, symbols, they live in each other's nightmares, yes, but also in each other's definitions of themselves. Let's start in Iran. You glide over Tehran, past the posters of martyrs and missiles, the anti-Israel murals so common they blur into background wallpaper. It's tempting to think the hatred is universal, but go deeper. A generation has come of age here that doesn't remember the Shah, doesn't care about Khomeini. They scroll Instagram behind VPNs, listen to underground Israeli techno, and question everything their parents were told. The Islamic Republic insists that Israel is a cancerous tumor, a colonial project, a Western outpost in the heart of Muslim land. But in living rooms and dorms, young Iranians ask, is this really our war? Or just a war the regime needs to stay in power? This question, whispered more and more often, is dangerous. Because Iran's leaders depend on enemies, not just externally, but existentially. Without Israel, without the Zionist threat, the revolution's fire risks going cold. And a revolution that loses its fire becomes something worse than fear. It becomes irrelevant. So the regime fans the flames. It funds Hezbollah and Islamic Jihad. It celebrates martyrs who attack Israelis. It turns military parades into theater, with cardboard models of Jerusalem's Al-Aqsa Mosque and cardboard missiles labeled Tel Aviv. And when protests erupt as they did in 2022 after the killing of Maza, Armenian leaders again point outward. Look at Israel. Look at the West. They're behind this unrest. They want to divide us. Blame is survival. But what about Israel? You drift now into a Tel Aviv cafe, full of startup founders and students. Everyone's on Wi-Fi. Everyone's on edge. Because for Israelis, the Iranian threat isn't theoretical, it's embedded in daily life. Missile drills in schools, gas mask kits, shelters in apartment buildings. You live with the idea that somewhere, deep underground, someone in Iran might be enriching uranium not just to 60%, but all the way. And for many Israelis, that's not just unnerving, it's apocalyptic. Remember? This is a country born in the shadow of the Holocaust. Never again isn't just a Matowitz's policy. The possibility of Iran developing a nuclear weapon feels like history knocking with a loaded gun. So Israeli leaders, especially Netanyahu, don't wait for consensus. They act, they sabotage, surveil, sanction, strike. And yet, within Israel too, there's doubt. You float into a classroom where young soldiers are being trained in cyber warfare. A teenager raises her hand. What if attacking Iran just makes them dig in deeper? What if peace is possible, but we never try? The instructor pauses, because the real answer is complicated. Peace would require not just treaties, but unlearning, unmaking decades of fear, rewriting myths that have defined both nations' identities. Historians still argue whether this rivalry was ever truly necessary. If it was just power politics dressed up in ideology, if the old alliance of the 1970s could have endured with different leaders, if there was ever a moment, even a fleeting one, where a different path was possible. One fringe theory suggests that Israel and Iran are like distant cousins in a family feud more similar than either side admits. Both ancient cultures, both surrounded by adversaries. Both deeply proud, stubborn, and brilliant. But trapped in a spiral where escalation is easier than honesty, and yet, flashes. Like the time in 2020 when Israeli hospitals treated Iranian COVID-19 patients anonymously through a back-channel NGO. Like the rogue tweet from an Iranian athlete who said he admired Israeli judo fighters, only to delete it hours later. Like the quiet conversation, captured once on a hidden mic, between an Israeli diplomat and an Iranian professor at a European conference. "We should talk," one said. "We are talking," the other replied. "It's not much, but it's something." And then there's the culture. Oh yes. You float through bookstores in both countries where banned authors are still read. Through kitchens where Persian Jewish dishes simmer with centuries of blended flavor. Through underground parties in both Tel Aviv and Tehran, where the same DJ remix plays at the exact same beat. Despite everything, the people are not at war. The states are. The missiles, the sanctions, the rhetoric, they come from governments, not citizens. And in a world where technology shrinks the gaps between humans, it's never been clearer that the people on either side are more alike than they were ever allowed to believe. One of the quirkiest examples, Iranian and Israeli hackers occasionally flirt on dark web forums. No joke, they taunt each other. Yes, but sometimes compliment each other's code. "Nice exploit," one Israeli wrote after an Iranian hack. "Thanks," came the reply. Somewhere in that sarcasm, respect. But respect isn't policy. Not yet, because both nations still need the rivalry. For now, Iran needs Israel to justify its resistance axis to keep Shia militias in line, to distract from economic collapse. Israel needs Iran to justify defense budgets to maintain US support, to unify a politically fractured population around a common fear. Remove the threat, and both countries would face terrifying questions. Who are we without our enemy? What do we become when we are no longer at war? And the truth is, neither side is ready to answer that yet. So the war shadowy, asymmetric, sometimes absurd goes on. Missiles that don't always launch. Threats that don't always land. Meetings that happen behind curtains, even as microphones shout rage. But even in the madness, you notice the small things. the Israeli movie that wins praise at an underground film festival in Tehran. The Iranian poem posted anonymously on a Hebrew poetry blog. The old Iranian Jewish man in Netanyahu who still blesses his tea in Farsi. Remembering a childhood in Shiraz before 1979. These are not peace deals. Not yet, but they are. Cracks. And light, as you know, gets in through cracks. You settle now into the deeper layers of time, the thick, quiet strata where rivalries become traditions and traditions become myths. Iran and Israel, no longer just states with borders and soldiers, have become stories in each other's psyche. Narratives passed along like heirlooms. Dusty, often rewritten, never fully questioned. And tonight, you're walking through the library of those stories. It's not loud, it's not violent. It's slow, soft. The way sediment builds over centuries until a fossil forms. Let's begin where stories often do, with secrets. You're drifting down a corridor in an Israeli intelligence archive not real, but imagined, stitched together from declassified footnotes and old analysts' coffee stains. The files on Iran, towering, yellowing, decades of watching, listening, decoding. And on Iran's side, the exact same obsession. They monitor Hebrew broadcasts, break down Israeli military doctrine, teach courses in how Zionists operate. Actual courses, some of it accurate, some of it so conspiratorial it'd make a lizard people theorist blush. But what matters isn't the accuracy, it's the volume. Both sides have built entire industries around knowing and fearing the other. One quirky moment. In 2018, a hacker group linked to Iran leaked materials from what they claimed was Mossad's psychological operations database. True or not, the leak included everything from political memos to bizarre files like Zionist use of social media animals. Yes, apparently Mossad was tracking cat memes. But even ridiculous documents reveal a truth. The story each side tells about the other is not just intelligence, it's identity. Take Iran's version of Israel. Two hardliners in Tehran, Israel is not a country. It's an imposter, born of colonialism and fueled by Western imperialism. The very name Israel is replaced in official language with the Zionist regime. Maps in Iranian textbooks often omit it entirely. It's not just denial, it's narrative warfare. Because if Israel doesn't exist, then its victories don't either. Its worries aren't real. Its right to defend itself, erased. And in Israel, Iran is never just Iran. It's a sponsor of terror, a theocratic monster, a nuclear-armed cult obsessed with destroying Jews. Even moderate Israeli voices often describe the Iranian regime as irrational, fanatical, messianic, which, if you think about it, is a dangerous assumption. Because assuming your enemy has no logic means you never prepare for the moments when they do something clever, worse, strategic. Historians still argue whether this caricaturing has made peace impossible. Some say yes, others argue it has at least kept the conflict below total war. After all, it's easier to launch missiles at a cartoon villain than a country full of people trying to fix potholes and pay rent. You drift now through Tehran's Friday sermons, where clerics still chant death to Israel, even as the young in the back roll their eyes and check Telegram. And in Jerusalem, you hear politicians vowing that Iran will never be allowed to go nuclear, words delivered as policy, but received as prophecy. The tension isn't just about territory or weapons anymore. It's about who gets to exist. Iranian leaders still call for Israel's destruction, though, to be fair. They often couch it as ending Zionism rather than bombing Tel Aviv. But the implication is clear enough. And Israel, in return, doesn't juxtapose Iran's regime. It acts as if Iran's nuclear ambition is not just a threat, but a Holocaust in waiting. That's not hyperbole. It's how the story is framed. Israel's identity is wrapped around never again. Iran's identity is wrapped around resistance against oppression. Put those two narratives in the same room, and it's like gasoline and matches. just waiting for one nervous spark. And yet here comes another strange detour. You land now in the ruins of Persepolis, ancient capital of the Achaemenid Empire. Tourists wander among the stones, listening to guides tell stories about Persia's golden age. One Israeli tourist stares at a cuneiform inscription and whispers, "We used to be friends." And they're not wrong. In the Bible, Cyrus, the great king of Persia, is praised for allowing the Jews to return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple. For centuries, Jews lived peacefully in Persia, built synagogues, served in government, even wrote poetry in Farsi. The memory of that coexistence still echoes. Some Iranian Justos who remained after 1979 still speak of Iran with pride. They're tolerated, protected on paper, though often pressured not to express too much loyalty to Israel. And on the Israeli side, there's still fascination with Iranian's culture, food, poetry, architecture. Some of the best Persian restaurants in the world are in Tel Aviv, run by families who fled after the revolution but never lost their accent. So how did we get from Cyrus the Liberator to AI-powered assassination drones? One theory: modern nationalism doesn't tolerate ambiguity. The Islamic Republic defines itself by resistance. Israel defines itself by survival. And both stories leave little room for nuance, for dual loyalty. For it's complicated. You float now over nuclear symbolism. Because the bomb, it's more than a weapon. It's a metaphor. For Iran, the nuclear program is about dignity, sovereignty, technological pride. For Israel, it's about survival, red lines, containment. And for the rest of us, it's a big, glowing symbol of how far rivalries can spiral when both sides forget that the other bleeds the same red. You drift into a classroom in Qom, where Iranian clerics in training study not just theology, but geopolitics, learning how to frame Israel in religious, political, and historical terms. You drift into an Israeli think tank in Herzliya, where military analysts simulate Iranian missile salvos and debate preemptive strike doctrine while sipping espresso. On both sides, the fear is real. The mistrust is real. And so is the preparation for a war that neither really wants but both believe may be inevitable. Here's the deepest irony. Both Iran and Israel are exceptionalist nations. Each believes it has a unique historical mission. Each sees itself as morally distinct, even superior. Each has suffered, endured, and emerged with a sense of destiny. But when two exceptionalist narratives collide, there's rarely room for both. So the story keeps writing itself. Through backchannels, through drone strikes, through firewalls and phone taps and encrypted cables. And still, people fall in love. Still, music travels. Still, history refuses to sit still. Because somewhere beneath all the politics and power plays, there is a quieter truth. Iran and Israel were not destined to be enemies. They chose this, or rather, their leaders did. And if stories can be chosen, they can also be rewritten. But only if someone has the courage to pick up the pen. You're moving through the present now just barely. A present that flickers between high-speed diplomacy and low-tech bloodshed, between summits and sirens. This is the part of the journey where even the most seasoned watchers hold their breath. Because now, the rivalry between Iran and Israel is no longer just shadow war. It's closer, riskier, personal, and you begin where else? In October 2023, you find yourself drifting over southern Israel, where the hum of everyday life has been shattered. Not by rockets this time, but by paragliders, motorcycles, and gunmen. It's Hamas launching the most brazen and deadly incursion into Israel in decades. And Yezeran is in the background, not directly, not openly, but unmistakably. Israel claims that Iran greenlit the attack, that it funded it, trained the fighters, and gave the nod. Iran, of course, denies direct involvement, but it celebrates the operation publicly. Leaders issue statements of support for the resistance. Crowds cheer in Tehran and in Israel. The response is nuclear in spirit, even if not in payload. You drift over Gaza, where airstrikes rain down with a fury not seen since 2014. Buildings collapse. Smoke coils into the air like morning flags. Civilians are caught. The world watches, cringes, debates, but Israel sees something bigger than Gaza. Iran's hand in the puppet show. And suddenly, the calculations change. Because if Iran is now operating that close, that aggressively, even by proxy, then the margin for delay disappears. And so begins one of the largest Israeli mobilizations in recent memory. Reservists, artillery, Iron Dome batteries humming like beehives on steroids. And in the background, Mossad activates. Iranian operatives across the region start dying. Explosions happen in Damascus. A drone depot in Iraq goes up in flames. An alleged cyber attack disrupts parts of Iran's gas distribution network. No confirmation. But you've been around long enough to recognize the pattern. Meanwhile, Lebanon grows hot. Hezbollah starts firing across the border. Not full-scale war yet, but coordinated, calibrated, enough to stretch Israel's attention, enough to open a second front without admitting to it. And for Israel, it's now a multi-theater conflict. Gaza, Lebanon, Syria, and behind every curtain, the same face, Iran. So you drift into a bunker deep under Mount Herzl, where Israeli military planners meet behind unblinking screens. One map shows strike plans for Iranian missile sites. Another shows Hezbollah command posts. Another is blank because it's just labeled Iran, Phase 2. They're not talking about if anymore. They're talking about when. Meanwhile, in Tehran, the tone shifts from triumph to tension. Because yes, the October incursion made headlines. Yes, it caught Israel off guard. But it also triggered the very scenario Iran was trying to avoid. A concentrated Israeli focus on Tehran's regional infrastructure. You hear debates in Iran's Supreme National Security Council. Some advocate restraint. Others argue, now is the time. Launch everything. Flood Israel with missiles. Collapse its defenses. But cooler heads and a very real fear of Israeli retaliation pulled the brakes. For now. Instead, Iran leans harder on its proxies. In Iraq, militias begin harassing U.S. bases. In Yemen, the Houthis launch missiles toward Israel for the first time. Most are intercepted. Some fall harmlessly into the sea. But the message is clear. We can reach you from everywhere. And Israel replies in kind. One night, deep in Tehran, a senior IRGC commander's car explodes. Another day, a drone crashes into a radar installation near Isfahan. Then a power outage hits a key centrifuge assembly building. Again, no one claims responsibility. Again, everyone already knows. You float now over the Strait of Hormuz, where Iranian speedboats buzz U.S. and Israeli-linked tankers. Tensions are now a permanent resident, here living between sonar pings and diplomatic protests. And amid it all, the nuclear issue has quietly evolved. Iran is now widely seen as a threshold state, a country that doesn't have a bomb, but could build one very fast if it chose to. Estimates range from weeks to a few months, and no one knows what would trigger that decision. An attack, a treaty collapse, a sense that the next strike might be the last. Historians still argue whether Israel will accept a nuclear threshold Iran. The truth is, Israel already did once with Pakistan, but Iran is different. The rhetoric, the proximity, the precision of the missiles, it all feels closer. You drift past Dimona, Israel's nuclear facility in the Negev desert. Still unacknowledged officially. Still the worst-kept secret in the region. There's a quiet understanding here. Israel will never say it has nuclear weapons, but it will act like it does. That ambiguity, it's strategic. It's the basis of deterrence. But deterrence only works when everyone's rational, and that's the problem. Both Israel and Iran now doubt the other's rationality. Iran believes Israel is too trigger-happy, too used to impunity. Israel believes Iran is too ideologically driven, too willing to burn for the sake of martyrdom. It's no longer a game of politics. It's a gamble of perceptions. You drift into the unwhere. Emergency sessions go nowhere. Where Western diplomats shuffle papers trying to talk both sides off the ledge. Russia and China back Iran, but cautiously. The US backs Israel, but nervously. No one wants a regional war, but everyone is preparing for one, and the public. They're exhausted. In Tehran, people line up for bread while reading about drone strikes. In Haifa, kids play soccer under the shadow of air defense systems. Everyone is tired of being told they're in danger. And yet, they are. You see a mother in Tel Aviv adding go-bag items to her online cart. You see a father in Shiraz stocking up on canned food because he doesn't trust what tomorrow brings. And you start to realize the fear is no longer abstract. It's domestic, intimate, built into daily life like traffic or weather, and still, tiny lights shine. A viral video shows an Israeli pianist playing a Persian love song on a street in Berlin. An Iranian exile in London posts an old family photo, his grandfather and a Jewish merchant in 1950s Tehran, arms around each other, beaming. The caption just says, "This was real." You pause, because yes, it was. But now, you're caught in the machinery of rivalry that no longer needs logic. A rivalry that, like some ancient clock, ticks because it has always ticked. Because no one wants to be the one to reach across and stop it. You drift now back to where you started, between two nations, between two stories. And somewhere in the darkness, you hear it. The whisper of inevitability. Or maybe, the call for something else. You drift now into the soft gray margin between the present and what comes next. It's not a forecasty, it's a tremble. The air around Iran and Israel is still warm from the last skirmish, but cooling fast into uncertainty. The kind of quiet that settles right before something irreversible. The question now isn't how did we get here? It's how do we leave this loop? But no one's reaching for the exit sign. Let us talk about the mutual obsession with deterrence because it has grown into a twisted sort of religion. For Israel, deterrence means hit back harder. Hit first, if you must. Make them afraid to even think of striking. This is the doctrine whispered into every Iron Dome battery, every cyber unit war room, every warplane humming over Syrian skies. Iran knows this, and it plays the same game just in reverse. For Iran, deterrence is saturation. Drones in the skies, militias in Iraq, sleeper cells in Lebanon. The idea isn't to win an open war. It's to make the price of attacking Iran so unbearably high that even Israel, with all its readiness, has to pause. So you get this strange equilibrium. Not peace, never peace. But not war either. You get escalation management, as analysts call it, like two rival chefs sharing a kitchen. Armed with butcher knives, glaring at each other while pretending to cook. But in recent years, the kitchen has gotten smaller. Iran's drones are faster, longer range. Israel's AI-guided surveillance picks up whispers and buzzra from satellites 500 miles up. Both sides are increasingly turning to automated warfare drones, bots, cyber weapons that don't sleep or hesitate. You float into Unit 8200, Israel's elite cyber force. Picture a clean room filled with 20-somethings who write viruses the way others compose music. They're the rumored architects of Stuxnet, the malware that once made Iranian centrifuges dance themselves to death. But guess what? Iran adapted. You drift across to Shahid Kavi, an IRGC cyber division. They've gone from barely managing internal servers to targeting Israeli hospitals with ransomware. There are even stories fringe, yes, but unsettling about Iranian hackers infiltrating Israeli dating apps. Not for state secrets, but for embarrassment. Psychological pressure, confusion. Historians still argue whether cyber war has made this rivalry more manageable or more dangerous. On one hand, no boots on the ground. On the other, no red lines. It's hard to prove attribution, harder still to calibrate response. One quirky recent detail. In 2024, Iranian TV aired a dramatized spy series about Mossad agents being outwitted by heroic Iranian youth. The Israeli response: a sarcastic TikTok remix using clips from the show. The comments, half in Hebrew, half in Persian. Mostly jokes. And yet, beneath the jokes, the edge is sharp. Now let's zoom out for a moment. Because Iran and Israel aren't just targeting each other directly anymore. They're both sculpting the region around themselves. Iran is expanding its drone exports not just to proxies like Hezbollah or the Houthis, but to Russia. Yes, during the war in Ukraine, Iranian drones became a staple in Russian assaults. Desreal. Israel sends aid to Ukraine, but stops short of direct military help, possibly fearing Russian backlash in Syria. So now, Ukraine becomes a weird proxy arena in the Iran-Israel conflict. And let's not forget China. In 2023, China brokered a surprise between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Everyone blinked. Suddenly, old enemies were shaking hands. It was less about peace and more about regional leverage. Iran hoped to look reasonable. Saudi Arabia hoped to limit Iranian aggression. China got headlines. But Israel saw it as a tightening net. Because if Iran can normalize with Arab states, it becomes harder to isolate. And if Israel can't convince the Gulf to join its anti-Iran front, it may end up standing alone. Still, not all Arab states are playing footsie with Tehran. The Abraham Accords, signed in 2020, remain a turning point. They brought Israel into open partnership with the UAE, Bahrain, and others. Quiet cooperation with Saudi Arabia continues, even if it hasn't gone official. This realignment, it terrifies Iran. Not just because of military encirclement, but because it undermines the story Tehran has sold for decades that Israel is hated and illegitimate across the Muslim world. When Arab leaders shake hands with Israeli ones, that story fractures. So Iran doubles down. More funding to Hezbollah, more drills in Syria, more smuggled weapons into the West Bank, more rage on the state channels. And always the nuclear card still not played, but always visible at the edge of the table. You drift now through a military think tank in Israel. They're running scenarios. What if Hezbollah launches 1,000 rockets a day? What if Iran builds a bomb and doesn't announce it? What if the Houthis blockade Israeli shipping routes? And worse, what if Israel strikes first and fails? Because yes, Israel could strike Iran's nuclear facilities. It has the planes, the tech, the intelligence. But even the most hawkish Israeli generals admit it wouldn't end there. It would be the beginning of a regional inferno. Tehran, Baghdad, Beirut, Haifa, Tel Aviv, maybe even Dubai glowing under rocket fire. And even if Israel wins, the price could be so high that the victory is hollow. This is the real nightmare now, not nuclear apocalypse, but nuclear threshold stalemate paired with constant proxy violence. A world where the Iran-Israel rivalry just becomes the background noise of the Middle East, forever unresolved. Forever tense, but never dramatic enough for the world to intervene. And you start to wonder, is this what they wanted all along? Not a war, not a peace, just ... control. Narrative dominance, eternal tension to justify every budget, every curfew, every checkpoint, and satellite. It sounds cynical, but you've been walking this path long enough to know it's not just about what happens, it's about what keeps not happening. There's a deep unease now in both countries. In Iran, the economy is cracking. Sanctions bite deeper. Young people tune out the anti-Israel rhetoric and tune into exile podcasts. The regime knows it's on borrowed time. That makes it more dangerous, not less. In Israel, internal divisions are widening. Democracy protests, religious tensions, settler violence. The military stretched thin. And yet, the Iran threat unifies everyone for now, because enemies make great glue, but even glue gets brittle. You float now through a Tel Aviv bar, where a Persian Jewish couple argues half in Farsi, half in Hebrew about whether their children will ever visit Iran. In Tehran, a bookstore owner shows a bootleg copy of an Israeli graphic novel to a trusted friend. These moments are small, but they're real. Because even as the two nations brace for the next strike, the next leak, the next denial, there are still people underneath the policy. People who remember, people who imagine, and people who wonder, what would it take to stop all this? A miracle. Maybe just a different story. Now you arrive quietly, without fanfare, the edge of the journey. Not the end, exactly. Just a place where you can look back. A long, slow exhale after miles of tension, centuries of conflict, and 1,000 whispered justifications on both sides. Here, in this final chapter, you're not scanning missiles or listening for drone motors. You're listening for something else. Legacy, memory, what this all leaves behind. Because whether this rivalry ends in peace or in ruins or in the strange, stale limbo it's lived in for decades, it will leave something. In textbooks, in trauma, in the way children learn to draw their maps. Let's begin, once more, with the young. You're drifting over Tehran, where children play soccer in alleyways under the watchful gaze of government posters. The murals still show fists crushing stars of David, missiles streaking toward a burning Israel. But the kids, they're not looking. They're yelling about penalties and fouls and snacks. Most of them have never met a Jewish person. Their parents tell them the usual things. Israel is dangerous. Israel is an enemy. But their phones tell a different story. On Instagram, they find Hebrew song covers, clips of Tel Aviv beaches, Israeli cats with too much attitude, and slowly, the edges blur. In Haifa, Israeli kids grow up with emergency drills. They learn how to shelter from rockets, how to detect suspicious objects. Iran is never mentioned in bedtime stories, but it's always there in the buzzwords. Threats from the north, terror proxies, enemies who hate us. But every now and then, someone says, "Why do they hate us?" And the room goes quiet. Because few can answer that cleanly anymore. The slogans have grown frayed from repetition. The logic behind them, too tangled to explain to a 6-year-old, or even a 60-year-old. Historians still argue whether this next generation will inherit the same fear or carve a new path. Some say yes, trauma lasts. Others believe kids raised with Wi-Fi and emojis may care more about climate change than ancient enmity. You drift now into museums. In Israel, the permanent exhibits on Iran have gotten bigger. More detailed, missile fragments, satellite photos, holograms showing potential strike routes. The message is clear. We must remain vigilant. In Iran, the Revolutionary Museum holds similar displays. Israeli drones, captured weapons, children's drawings of Jerusalem liberated. It's both nostalgia and prophesying effort to fix the story into something eternal. But stories are slippery things. Even now, in underground theaters, Iranian filmmakers tell quiet, ambiguous tales that sidestep official narratives. A story about a Jewish shopkeeper in Shiraz. A family torn apart, not by bombs, but by borders they didn't draw. In Israel, poets write lines like, "You live in my shadow, and I in yours, twin silhouettes, pretending not to see." Art remembers what politics forgets. Meanwhile, the diaspora lives in the space between. Persian Jews in Los Angeles still speak Farsi over Shabbat dinner. Some call Iran home, even though they fled decades ago. Young Israeli tourists in Istanbul meet Iranian expats and share hookah without the weight of history between them. One quirky detail. In 2025, an Iranian-Israeli fusion food truck opened in Toronto. Dishes with names like Sabzi Falafel Explosion and Juja Shawarma Surprise. It made headlines. It also sold out almost every night. There's something about taste that bypasses politics. But legacies aren't just flavors or poems. They're laws, treaties, systems. Iran's future will hinge on what happens after the supreme leader. He's aging. His successor will shape whether the regime doubles down on hostility or tries something different. Israel's future may hinge on its internal fractures. If it cannot reconcile its democracy with its occupation, its pluralism with its politics, then external threats, real or exaggerated, will keep being used to plaster over internal cracks. Both nations are strong, proud, capable, and deeply tired. You feel that now, in the way soldiers in both armies stare into the middle distance. In the way leaders repeat phrases like legitimate defense and unacceptable provocation, as if language alone can hold back war. But here's the part they rarely admit. They've grown used to it. Used to the rivalry. Used to the heat it provides, even when it burns. Some scholars call it conflict inertia, a state where war never fully comes because it has already embedded itself into the machinery of daily life. You know it when you see it. When Iran funds another militia, not because of strategy, but because it always does. When Israel strikes another convoy in Syria, not because it must, but because it can't afford not to. Like a chess game where both players forgot why they started, but they keep moving pieces out of habit. Out of fear that stopping might mean they've lost. So will it end? Maybe not with a treaty or a handshake, but with quiet erosion. New priorities, new threats. Climate disasters, water shortages, economic collapse. Things neither missiles nor ideology can solve. And maybe, one day, leaders on both sides will ask, what if the world moves on and we still stuck fighting a war nobody remembers the reason for? Until then, the story loops. But now you've heard it, felt it, followed it from covert deals in the 70s to encrypted proxy wars today, and you know the truth. This wasn't a rivalry born in days. It was built choice by choice, myth by myth, fear by fear, and only unbuilt the same way. Slowly, gently, patiently, one choice at a time. Now you're floating, light as a feather on warm evening air. The noise of rockets and radio static has faded behind you, and the maps so sharp before now blur into gentle colors. Beige for the desert, silver for the cities. A calm, cooling gray for the space in between. The rivalry we've walked through tonight wasn't clean. It wasn't fair. It wasn't simple. But then, the real world rarely is. Especially in places where history sits heavy on every rooftop and ideology wraps itself around the morning news like fog on a windshield. And yet, people still live, still love, still cook dinner, walk dogs, dream of beach holidays and clean air and quiet mornings. Even in the places where sirens wail, someone is always planting something: roses in a window box, mint leaves in a mug of tea, hope in the hands of a child too young to understand who hates whom or why. So as your eyes grow heavy now, let all of that noise, the politics, the missiles, the headlines fall away. Let it dissolve into softness. What remains isn't a treaty or a truce, but something deeper, a kind of listening, a stillness, a whisper that says, we're not so different. We've just forgotten how to remember. So take a breath. Let it out slower than before. The lights are dim. The hum of the fan is steady. Your bed is warm. The blanket's heavier now, like history has folded itself gently around you, but not in a way that suffocates. Just a little reminder that you made it. Through centuries of tension, and now into peace. At least for tonight.